Okay, well, welcome to another edition of Word in Your Ear. Now, the NME's C86 came out 36 years ago, and it's now generally considered to be a pivotal moment in British pop culture, and indeed the birth of indie. And an old pal of ours has embarked on some very impressive detective work and tracked down all 22 of the acts that were on it for a book that he's got coming out soon called Whatever Happened to the C86 Kids, an Indie Odyssey. So welcome, Nige Tassell. Nige, it's lovely to see you.
And to see you guys. Hello, hello, hello.
And you've got a copy. Hold it up. You have a copy of the
I've got a copy of the buried treasure, the golden treasure. There we are.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Which
Just
is now...
remind us, you were 17, I think, when it came out in 1986. It was obviously a really transformative thing for you, wasn't it?
It was, you know, because I was too young for punk, and so, and even I had an older brother, and he was still too young for punk. This was kind of almost the punk thing, because it was, you know, those bands getting together, 3 chords, couldn't play properly, but just wanted to be in a band and wanted to kind of live that life. And so it's very exciting. 1986 to me is, in the way that 1971 is important to Dave, 1986, 85 and 86 are kind of pivotal, or 16, 17. And so at that time I was into stuff like the Triffids, REM, Smiths, Go-Betweens, but then suddenly these kind of scratchier, slightly more amateurish bands suddenly appeared, you know, through the inky pages of the NME, and the C86 tape was great because you got bands on there you did know, you'd heard of The Wedding Present, Primal Scream, etc. But then who the hell are the Shrubs? Who the hell are the Mackenzies? You know, it opened a sort of portal into some sort of life that I could kind of connect with.
I can't think of the track list of that tape without hearing John Peel's voice. Can't you? The Mighty Stump and Bogshed and Close Lobsters. It's just so part of that time.
He is the presence throughout the book as well, because every single band was in awe of him, because I think it was the guy from Mighty Mighty said, without John Peel, what have you got? You got 1,000 unsold singles under your bed, you know. Yes. and he was just the enabler of the entire scene, because each of the 22 bands had at least one Peel session.
Yeah.
And speaking to all these people, you know, everyone repeats the story of going to Maida Vale, meeting Dale Griffin, the producer, you know, the ex-drummer of Motley Crue.
Yeah.
And that was just like, you know, it's like a royalist going to Buckingham Palace or something like that. It was the equivalent of that, and they all speak so nicely of just, you know, going through the sainted halls of Maida Vale Studios.
Fantastic. So you set out to find all these people, all these bands.
Yeah.
Tell us about the quest and how difficult that was.
Well, we sold the book, and I didn't really have too much connection with anyone. I'm fortunate enough to be good pals with Nigel from Half Man Half Biscuit, so, but he's a contrary so-and-so, so he said no. But he did say yes.
That's your friend.
Good stuff. That's your friend. So
that's my friend.
You
exactly.
knew it was going to be downhill all the way.
Well, exactly. You know. So then I did interview Dave Gedge from The Wedding Present before, and I knew that would be fine. But there was still left 20 bands that I had no connection with whatsoever. You know, and I had visions of, okay, a few months' time, the publisher's going to be asking for their money back. You know, you've got 6 of the 22. But it was just a thing that mushroomed. You kind of focus on the ones who've got a presence now, who might still be going, i.e. Mighty Mighty or the Wolfhounds, and you kind of build it up, and then you get that strength in numbers. Suddenly you've got a dozen signed up, and then everyone kind of follows and falls into place. So when I got the 22nd band, that was a punch the air moment, definitely.
But you started off with things. There was the shop assistants, Dave Keegan. I think all you knew about him was that he apparently ran a bike shop somewhere in the Highlands. Is that right? That's the kind of thing you started with? That's
a lovely lead. I mean, I wish that each one was as romantic as that. You just got this lead that you had to follow. So yes, so onto the internet to find out all the names of all the bike shops in the Highlands, and moved out from there. And I got him on about the 6th attempt. Suddenly, Bothy Bikes, who had just moved away from Aviemore into Kingussie, and there we had him, and he said, yeah, we've just moved shop, bit chaotic, but come on up. So, you know, that was a lovely quest to go up on the train up to the Highlands to go and chat indie with a man behind the counter of his bike shop while he's serving customers and taking calls about various, you know, parts and spares that the local biking community needed.
So, generally speaking, were people delighted to be contacted, or were any people saying, "Oh, I had nothing to do with that as part of my life, I left behind," or how did they?
I had
respond?
maybe 3 or 4 that were reluctant. I managed to persuade 1 or 2 of those that, hey, it's going to be all right.
Why were they reluctant? They just didn't. It wasn't a happy memory, or
it wasn't a happy memory. Basically, the band split up. If they had a band with their mates and suddenly, they fell out and they didn't want reminders of that necessarily. But most people, in the past, I've interviewed a lot of retired footballers, and they're only too willing to talk about the kind of glory days. And this lot were the same. They're all in the late 50s, early 60s. They don't give too much of a hoot anymore. And they're willing to just chat about the times and reminisce, and that was fabulous.
So how many of those bands were still kind of active? Because you get the impression quite a lot were still occasionally meeting up.
There definitely was. So you've got the ones who've carried on going. So Primal Scream, Half Man, Half Biscuit, The Wedding Present. Then you've got people like Mighty Mighty, who I mentioned, who reformed maybe 10 years ago, all with the original members. Then you have the Pastels still going in a different iteration. There's probably a good 8 or so that are doing things under their names of what they were, and all the others are going, oh yeah, I've been making some tracks during lockdown. I'm hoping someone's going to put them out. A lot of them, because they when they stop the band, it doesn't mean they stop the music. They're still there, still there in their back rooms, in their bedrooms. And actually, that gave them the perfect chance to do it.
That's one of the interesting things that I think you say in the introduction. It's the kind of punk that started all this do-it-yourself. Actually, the start of do-it-yourself is this time. It's the mid-'80s, isn't it? And do-it-yourself has continued. There's even more do-it-yourself now because the technology is available.
Yeah,
everybody's got a little studio in their bedroom, haven't they? Yeah. Whereas in the early days of punk rock, you had to go and find somebody who had a studio.
Absolutely. And then what I found someone like the band McCarthy, 2 or 3 of them were kind of dreamers about music. John, the bass player, he had a job at the post office, and it was basically his wages that were kind of propping up the band. So that would be the rehearsal room cost would come out of the van hire.
Yes.
John would take care of it,
Right. Was there a kind of definition for the kind of character of a C86 band? There's a lovely quote from Bogshare where they said, Alan McGee came to see us playing in London and he couldn't decide whether it's in the best band in the world or the worst band in the world. And I think Kath Carroll of Meow said something like, we adored the Shirelles, but we sounded like a bad accident at a full rehearsal. So is that part of it? Are there some characteristics that seem to define all of them?
Well, C86 came to be known as, sort of fey boys dressing up as Boy Scouts, the very soft kind of weedy end of it. And the tape itself isn't like that. If someone wrote down, say, these are the characteristics of a C86 band, very few from the tracks on the tape certainly would fall into that category, because you've got the Ron Johnson label in Long Eaton near Nottingham, and they had Bogshed, A Witness, Big Flame, the Mackenzies. Really quite abrasive, difficult listen in some places. But I think, it's that jingle jangle sound, and, the Pastels track on there would probably fall into that category. The Shop Assistants, quite a quiet, reflective track, that would as well. The Soup Dragons track, which sounds just like similar to the Buzzcocks to me. It wasn't that they were reinventing the wheel, but they were just taking any kind of punk ideal, I guess, having gone through post-punk, but then going poppier as well. And it's kind of the amalgam of those 3, I think, that possibly gives it.
The Dragons were one of the really ambitious groups, weren't they? Weren't they managed by the guy Jazz Summers? Who took Wham
to China, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I lived in the States sort of the turn of the 90s, and they were huge out there. Absolutely, they would be filling arenas. They were supporting INXS at Madison Square Garden. You go back 4 years, and they're just on this tape, just playing a little indie song that you would not think had a place in an arena whatsoever.
I like the idea that you go and find them. Do you tend to have lots of meetings in, I don't know, bus stations or whatever? In small. And it always strikes me one of the great truths of British music is most of it comes from small towns.
Absolutely, yeah.
Rather than cities, so places you haven't quite heard of, you know.
Yeah, you know. So I went to Whitstable, I went to the Wirral, I went to Glossop, I went to or near Doncaster, not even Doncaster, you know. And yes, what I wanted to do was speak to everyone as much as possible in the context of what they do now. So where people go, oh, we'll just meet in the pub. Okay, has the pub got any significance to the band? And if it had, then that was fine. But if not, so for instance, Dave Callahan from the Wolfhounds, he now writes. He's a really noted ornithologist, writes books on birds. So he finds me knocking on his door at 7 a.m. in Walthamstow, so we can drive down the A13 to Rainham Marshes, and he talks about the wolfhounds while he's identifying 20, 30 birds in front of me.
Yeah. You've also got story. One of the things that strikes me is there's so many of the stories where people, they had their moment in the sun and then they kind of kept going or whatever. And then very often there was a dark night of the soul, wasn't there? There's very often a point, oh, I just realized I'd gone on too long. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of those stories is the guy Jukes, who was the tambourine player in the first version of Primal Scream, who just goes, you know what? I don't like these people anymore. I don't like sitting in a van being sweaty and drunk and, going up and down the motorway. It was fun at the time, at the start, but now it's quite a bore. So yeah, he decided, right, this is going to be my last gig. Played, I think it was Ulu in London, and just disappeared. And he goes, I effed off the first train back to Glasgow, and that was it. And then the next day they're going, where are you? Where are you? Well, I'm at home. That's it. I've had enough of you guys. Stump famously in their last gig, they all knew that it was over. They all knew it was the last one. They just played as fast as they could to get it over with, and that was it. Just kind of went their separate ways. But then they kind of come back, and the passing of time and people mellowing a bit, and then they kind of want to get back together.
How long does it take for them to come back together again? How does that work? There must be an appreciable period of time before people forget that who owed so-and-so what money,
who stole so-and-so's girlfriend.
Yes, girlfriend.
Yeah, I think it's probably it's that point at which they've gone back, they've doing something else with their lives, kids to come along, kids have suddenly disappeared, and we all know that how much time being a taxi service to kids takes up.
Absolutely.
Suddenly you've got hours in the day to fill. Yes. And I think the much of the time they're probably thinking, well, what do I fill my days with? What made me happy before this domesticity?
Yeah.
I should give Jeff a call. I should give Jim a call. Let's just meet up for a pint. It won't necessarily lead anywhere, but it would be good to catch up. And I think it probably does take 20, 25 years if there are wounds to heal, or just to kind of, for everything to just be okay again, and just everyone had grown up a bit. Because these bands, they're all about 22, 23 at the time, and now they're in the late 50s. It's more than half their life ago.
It's so interesting because it made me think that actually the story of all bands is nearly always exactly the same. Doesn't matter who they are, the internal dynamic of the group and the way they get on or don't get on. But in this case, they didn't have the money to be able to survive it. You know what I mean? It's much more exposed, isn't it? It's much more kind of raw.
It really is. They've got no protection. They've got no infrastructure around them, massaging egos. It's just, they're there. They, almost invariably in the back of their transit, or they're on the tube going to Maida Vale to do their peel session with their instruments. They can't even afford. They've gone down on the train, because none of them can drive, or something ridiculous like that. But yes, it's the dynamics are just, it's the same trajectory. Whether you're a stadium-filling rock and roll band, which the Soup Dragons were by the time they kind of imploded, or whether your band are just going, we've run out of steam. This is clearly where, as far as we're going to go, is this upstairs room in this pub. We're subsidising it ourselves. Is there any point?
I love that. I like the way it starts. I think you go to a Bobby Gillespie book event, or
that's right, in Bath.
Yeah. It's like one. You got this whole army of people who took part on the cassette. All their lives went into this, all their various different lives, and yet one person ends up all these years later being kind of legendary. And
It's,
it's sort of not fair. It's kind of, it just draws attention to the madly random nature of fame and success, doesn't it?
and if you press the pause button to continue the cassette analogy on 1986, one of these people will be thought of by some people to be Jagger-esque, in terms of their performance and their kind of stature. Bold-cutted Bobby Gillespie would not be top of that list, I'm sure. And if you think about it, and also Primal Scream's their biggest hit, Loaded. He's not singing on it. That's what everyone does. He doesn't sing on it. That's the extraordinary thing. He's probably playing the tambourine after the tambourine guy buggered off,
Yes, absolutely. The tambourine guy gave him his big opportunity by buggering off to Glasgow and letting him play the tambourine.
The track listing of the tape lends itself to, I mirrored that in terms of the chapters. So that meant that we could start with Bobby Gillespie, just admiring him from afar, or observing him from afar at least, before I then go into trying to find the driving instructors, the teachers, the university lecturers, the shopkeepers. So that was it lent itself really well because, that first one I could just watch him walking up the aisle of this church in Bath, and you expect him to have a rock and roll strut. And it's just a shambling man, and it totally demystified it straight away,
And he kind of doesn't have anything to say either, really, does he? It's just we've decided Bobby Gillespie, wow, and therefore he doesn't have to do anything.
And he was kind of, come here, welcome this rock and roll legend. It's Bobby Gillespie, and this is coming up the aisle of a church, surrounded by church volunteers who are there for the event. He's potty-mouthed as anything during the event, much to their kind of shame and chagrin. But that's who he is. So it was quite nice to kind of demystify that a little bit because he didn't strut on like a rock and roll star, and was certainly in the first half of that evening quite uncomfortable with just sitting down, talking about with all eyes fixed on him and under the full proper lighting as opposed to rock and roll lighting where you can look. Slightly semi-disguised, a bit mysterious.
Yes, it's unforgiving, isn't it?
Full glare of the full lights.
Yeah.
So, what's your favourite story in the book?
Yeah,
who do you really enjoy finding? And
I did enjoy the Soup Dragons one, mainly because that's probably quite a difficult story, and then what happened to Sean Dixon afterwards. He's made no secret of it. He tried to take his own life when things didn't go well. But reinvented himself as a DJ, and that was really nice. So I met him in his local park in the cemetery in Mile End, walking his dogs, which was really nice. This guy's been on the stage at Madison Square Garden with 20,000 people in the palm of his hand, and here he is picking up his dog poo in the park with me. But his story is really good. But then also meeting Sushil, who was the bass player in Soup Dragons, being at his house up in Helensburgh. And that was just a lovely afternoon. He served me chai and samosas, mid-morning samosas. And we just had this lovely chat about, because he was one who did become a driving instructor afterwards. He had played Madison Square Garden, had enough of it. He said we went off to India to go and do some travelling and sit in a bar and suddenly hear the Soup Dragons being played over the PA. There was just no escape from it. But he needed that escape. So he just became a driving instructor. He had two clienteles. One was Punjabi Glaswegians, and the other one was Glasgow's rock and roll fraternity. So teaching various members of the shop assistant, or not the shop assistant, but the pastels and teenage fan club how to drive a car, how to drive that van that they could take themselves to gigs. So I really enjoyed that one, just because they were very human tales. I enjoyed walking the banks of the Thames at 7:30 in the morning and saw a Dartford warbler, which apparently very rare. Dave had been there several times, knew there was one there. I was quite nonplussed. It just looked like a little brown bird in a bush.
It's a bird.
There we are. But just the travelling around, I've always tried to have a travel element in my books as much as possible, because I just like going out and meeting people and seeing you going to visit Glossop, or going to sit or Nigel. Obviously, spending an afternoon at Nigel Blackwell's front room, just sitting back and being entertained for several hours with cups of tea and biscuits.
He's so funny, isn't he?
And he's just
so where he's a big bike enthusiast, isn't it? And he was going out biking in terrible weather, and he said,
"Well, this is it.
Nobody calls me Andy Fairweather Cyclist." That was so good.
That was the plan. The plan was that we were going to meet outside John Peel's childhood home.
Yes.
So just in context. But it was just monsoon weather. When I was driving across the M56, And I just stopped and said, "Look, this is crazy." He goes, "Yeah, just come round to ask for a cuppa." So we did. So
Half Biscuits strike me as one of the real success stories. I mean, there are ones who've had great commercial success, Primal Scream and Wedding Present, all still going. But Half Man, Half Biscuit, just Nigel Blackwell has remained completely true to what he was doing back then. Hasn't really changed, but still,
absolutely. You know, as it is, they were the most successful band at the point that C86 came out. They'd already had a #1 album. They'd had Back in the DHSS the previous year.
Oh yeah,
the best-selling independent album of that year. It beat the Smiths. It beat New Order. Yeah. Nigel tells me the story of going to the record industry do in Grosvenor House, which I cannot believe he even considered going to. And he still refused to go up on stage and get his award. But they outsold the Smiths and New Order that year. But then he jacks it all in within a year of that success, going, you know what, I don't want this. There's that legendary story where the Tube wanted them to appear, and they were going to send a helicopter to the Wirral, to Birkenhead, to take them to Newcastle to do the Tube. And Nigel said, well, Tranmere Rovers are playing at home. We play on Friday nights. He's just willfully unambitious. But in fact, playing the long game, he's the one with the best longevity and control of what he wants to do completely.
Absolutely.
But isn't this also tied up with the thing I mentioned earlier? It's regional Britain, isn't it? You know what I mean?
It really is.
I stay home. I don't go to London. I don't go to New York. That's Sin City. That is over there. You know what I mean?
Well, I think if you think of punk, I mean, not it's not wholesale, but largely a London thing, and a lot of them came from the suburbs around London. This is how this is different. This is in the small towns further afield.
This is totally. It's when that message got there. It took quite a while, and then people formed groups and did it their way. Nearly 10 years later, didn't they?
And very few ran off to London to go and live either. Quite a lot of them stayed where they were. They would sign. A lot of them signed to major labels, and in the wake of this, most had terrible experiences, and that kind of brought about the premature demise of their band as well. When they suddenly realised this isn't what I much preferred going into a studio for 50 quid an evening for a couple of hours, bashing out a couple of numbers live, and that will be our next single, as opposed to spending 3 weeks down in South Wales. Working on the drum sound, working on particular snare sound, because that was what
brilliant
it was about.
I think it might be the Pastels who go to a studio for £1,000 a day with ping pong tables and a meter running and find it absolutely impossible to function. Was it them?
It's completely different.
Yeah,
it's completely different from you just hiring out the village hall or whatever, or a pub room above a pub, because you're playing together as an ensemble. Suddenly, all right, Bob. You're needed now. The others, you go and get a cuppa because we got to fix Bob's hi-hat sound.
Yes,
that's about, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So these groups, their initial ambition was to be on John Peel, and then if they're on C86, they must have thought, that's great. I suggest appearing in your book is the perfect. It is, seriously. I mean, they all these years later, they can turn around to their children and possibly grandchildren and say, "That's my story."
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Immortalized.
That we did this thing, and clearly it wasn't it was a kind of success in its own way. And actually, that's one thing it was hugely important to the NME, massively important innovation that Roy Carr brought in.
Yeah,
hugely sold a lot of papers for the NME.
It really did.
For those groups, they can look back and say, I may never have gone near a chart, but I was on that. And look, here's a book that tells that story.
Exactly. And I'll go up in the loft and I'll show you this, and the grandchildren will go, "What the hell? The cassette?" They're beginning to learn what vinyl is again, but a cassette, that would flip their wing. Yes, and I think so. Enough passing of time. Had I written this, 10, 15 years after C86, it wouldn't have been remotely interesting. But because people have gone through their lives, a lot of retiring now, and they've got time to stop and think and reconsider what they did and go, did that actually happen? Because it will feel like another life ago to them. And then it means that they're all kind of really willing to talk and and happy to share those memories. You know?
So when you started by finding your copy of that cassette, didn't you?
I did.
You don't keep things in kind of perfect archives. You're not one of those people. Is that what you say?
As you can see from the backdrop here, I'm just in one of the front rooms. No, I don't have this wall of vinyl behind. You know, we just never had the space, and so but I still don't want to throw it. So it's boxes and boxes of tapes up in the loft, and of course it was the very last box, the one furthest across the eaves. You know, splinters, getting fiberglass burns from the insulation, everything. Worried that, you know, I'm not the weight I was in 1986, and therefore the ceiling might be giving way below me.
Yes, yeah.
So yes, I had to go out and find it, and but then of course I had no means of playing it, so I ended up just going onto YouTube to kind of play the tracks anyway.
So you've got a cassette, but no cassette player.
You haven't got the music.
Player, you know.
I put it to you, Nige Tassell. If you hadn't found the cassette, you wouldn't have done the book.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
It is. It's the physical thing in front of you. Oh yes,
you wouldn't have had the light bulb moment when you would have looked at this and thought, "There's a book in this."
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and that box smelt of 1986 to me upstairs as well.
Yeah.
So that kind of transported me, and I thought, you know what, that's quite a smell I'd quite like to have in my nostrils again.
Have you asked any of them? It struck me there's a bit, I think, where a member of the Mighty Lemon Drops in about 2007 forms a kind of C86 All-Stars for a one-night gig. It struck me that'd be a brilliant idea to launch this book. Have you talked to any of them about the idea of getting together?
Yeah, that would be lovely. I think logistically it's quite tricky, but you never know. We might have put the feelers out now. So yes, if anyone who I interviewed, because there were 94, 95 musicians on that tape. Some of them not with us anymore. But yes, I'm sure we can get 2 guitarists, a vocalist, a bass player, and a drummer.
Yes, exactly.
And
the idea is of Stump. You know, it's a C86. So it's a super group, isn't it?
Next summer, it's a festival. I'm sorry, it's a festival.
Right, we'll do that with the paperback. Yeah, paperback next year. That will be the plan. Absolutely.
Well, it's terrific, Nige. It's really good, and I'm sure a lot of people, like you, will find their youth reawakened by looking at it. When's it out? It's coming out soon.
It's August the 18th, but pre-orders available in all the usual outlets.
Nige, lovely to talk to you.
Thank you, chaps. Very kind. Thank you.
Good luck with this. Fantastic book.